Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable guests, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon, and Ayo Bhavan. I welcome all of you to this seminar titled Peace and Stability, an Imperative to Prosperity in South Asia, organized by the High Commission of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. We will begin by the recitation of a few verses from the Holy Quran.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعاديات ضبحا فالموريات قدحا فالمغيرات صبحا فأثرن به نقعا فوسطن به جمعا إن الإنسان لربه لكنود وإنه على ذلك لشهيد وإنه لحب الخير لشديد أفلا يعلم إذا بعثر ما في القبور وحصل ما في الصدور إن ربهم بهم يومئذ لخبير.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I now request all of you to rise for the national anthems of Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Azad Jammu and Kashmir.
Lanka वतन हमारा आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर। वतन हमारा आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर। बाहों और पहाड़ों वाला, दरियाओं को सारों वाला, आसमान है जिसका परचम, परचम चांद सितारों वाला, जन्नत के नजारों वाला। जम्मू और कश्मीर हमारा वतन हमारा आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर। वतन हमारा आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर। हमारा आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर। वतन हमारा आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर। वो हिंदुस्तानियों की आबादी, कहीं चुकी ताजे आजादी, इज्जत के परवाने जागे, आजादी की शमा लगी, जाग उठी है सारी वादी, जामिल है अल्लाह तुम्हारा। वतन हमारा आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर। वतन हमारा आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर। कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर। वतन हमारा आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर। करते लालच क्यों वो शैतान, क्यों बेचे हम दीनो ईमान, पाकिस्तान के साथ खड़े हैं, इज्जत हुर्मत हुक्म कुरान, जान भी कुर्बान माल भी कुर्बान, माल भी प्यारा जान से प्यारा। वतन हमारा आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर। वतन हमारा आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर, आजाद कश्मीर।
February the 5th is observed the world over as Kashmir Solidarity Day in order to express our diplomatic and moral support to the Kashmiri people. In the present times, when regional connectivity and integration have become all the more impactful, it has become pertinent to deliberate on how this South Asian region of ours can be better integrated to serve global stability and peace. But it is also deeply ironic and unfortunate that while on one hand we talk about regional peace and security, on the other hand, some people in this region are still sacrificing with their life and blood to gain their basic right of self-determination. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now request our panelists to please join us on the stage. First of all, I would like to request Major General Retired Mohammed Saad Khattak to please come up on the stage. Thank you, sir. Next on, I would like to invite Sardar Attique Ahmed Khan, the former Prime Minister of Azad, Jammu and Kashmir. Sir, I would now like to request the Member of Parliament from the United Kingdom, Mr. Graham Jones, to please come on the stage. May I now request Ms. Medha Ji Alwis, a journalist and legal practitioner, to please come up on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that all disputes can be resolved through dialogue. However, the fact remains that some countries remain averse to negotiations. How to move forward in such scenarios will be deliberated upon today in this seminar. We are honored to have our guests on the stage now. I would first of all request Mr. Graham Jones to share his thoughts on conflicts and cooperation in South Asia, role of regional and international powers. The stage is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency, for inviting me to Colombo to this important international conference on an issue which is of vital importance, in my view, to the world, but also to my constituents. And I was asked to come here to provide a Western perspective. However, I have visited Kashmir, and I would like to make at the end some personal observations. My name's Graham Jones. I was, until very, very recently, a member of the House of Commons. I chaired one of the controversial House of Commons committees, the Arms Export Control Committee, a topic on its own, one that discusses the cutting edge of military and economic power. It's a changing landscape in arms production and distribution that is affecting how we resolve global tensions. We're seeing the threat of military nuclear development in Iran and North Korea and the consequences that this has. But we are also waking up to the power of knowledge transfer in chemicals, science, engineering, including student visas, as well as the power of a plethora of software and IT that, when transferred potentially to military use, could be misused for the purposes of soft power. I recently led a UK delegation to the United States, to Capitol Hill, to discuss the next decade with the Americans. My report, our report, will be published in the coming weeks by the new committee. It will, I think, be a watershed moment for the direction of future arms export controls. Of concern is the scale in that report of Chinese acquisition, production and sale. But today I want to talk about the broader scene, setting out the Western perspective on challenging international issues, the dramatically changing Western perspective, and finally and specifically the Kashmir issue. Around 10% of my constituents in my Northern English constituency are of Kashmir heritage. So it gives me great pleasure to speak here today at this international conference. As I say, I was fortunate enough to visit Kashmir recently, and what a beautiful place it is. I want to start with what is a truism, certainly in the West, that particularly troubled areas remain a low priority, and Kashmir is one of those contentious issues. In fact, the Washington Post went so far last year as to claim that the world no longer cares about Kashmir. But before considering that issue of Kashmir itself, it is worth reflecting from that Western perspective on the moral case for international intervention, a question that is increasingly being asked in the West. And that is, why should responsibility for moral action lie just in the hands of a few Western nations? Why doesn't the West just walk away and benefit from the redistribution of the costs of those overseas interventions to their own domestic priorities. From my own perspective, and one that reflects on a new Brexit Europe, there is a Europe that is withdrawing ever into itself, driven by an ever-increasing public appetite for international disengagement and a retreat from the conflicts of others. Challenging domestic priorities are the focus for many weary Western taxpayers who see no upsides or credit for their moral or financial sacrifices. What we're seeing, in fact, is a reversal of the Tony Blair's famous speech in 1999 in Chicago, The Doctrine of the International Community, where Blair laid out a moral roadmap for collective Western responses to international crises. Blair spoke powerfully of a global interdependence and of a world where isolationism has ceased to have a reason to exist. He went on to say, on the eve of a new millennium, we are now in a new world. We need new rules for international cooperation and new ways of organising our international institutions. That view now, some 20 years later, is a much diminished view. The last decade has seen the West withdraw from that self-assumed responsibility, which has increasingly, I have to say, left a United Nations underpinned by that Western view of global interdependence, now facing questions of authority and ability in itself. The question has been raised whether the United Nations is fit for purpose in 2020. And that disengagement we've seen over the last decade. In Afghanistan, the West has withdrawn and allowed the Taliban to retake control. In Iraq, the West withdrew, leaving a divided country with several nodes of power, including Tehran, and a military and policy vacuum that led to the rise of ISIS. In Syria, most controversially, the West chose not to act, but delegated responsibility to its citizens to decide. The West chose not to act in Yemen, the world's largest humanitarian crisis where global terrorism is taking foot, and in Libya, which saw old allies diverge as France and the United Kingdom led a limited airstrike campaign without US support, simply to prevent a Gaddafi-led military operation on Benghazi, with no plan beyond that. There is a new populist wave of resistance to intervention, one that has simply ignored the absolute catastrophe that is Syria, a new Western perspective that was cemented by parliamentary votes in the House of Commons on Capitol Hill in Congress, with its bipartisan, I have to say, opposition to Obama's requests for Syrian intervention, and in France, where 3/4 of French people wanted the proposed Syrian intervention put to a parliamentary vote. Obama's August the 12th red line on the use of chemical weapons was no longer red or a line. His words, that such use would change my calculus, didn't change anybody else's calculus. Chemical weapons continued to be used on the people of Syria. The fact that the President of the United States of America, Barack Obama, announced on Sunday, August the 31st, 2013, that he would seek congressional approval for any military intervention in Syria, in itself reflected the new Western view of intervention. The focus has been on other conflicts, Greater Russia, a West that has been deliberately distracted by classical Greater Russian expansionism in Ukraine, Crimea, the Caucasus, Baltics and elsewhere, and the United States that has been consumed by its own interests with Iran, North Korea, and most of all, China. It's a fragmented approach. Furthermore, what was once a coordinated Western approach between the USA and Europe is now fragmenting. Diplomatic rows between Paris and Washington, Berlin and Washington are all too frequent. A United States critique of a European commitment to NATO and a US president happy to criticise Europe frequently has all led to enormous strains on a Western collective response to global affairs. And on Iran, there has been significant divergence on the JCPOA, Iran nuclear deal, undermining any Western response beyond the Oval Office. The policy of maximum pressure from the White House resulting in a fragmented and conflicted response in and outside of Europe by the West. There has also been tit-for-tat economic sanctions between the United States and Europe and a general air of adversity rather than commonality between the two great nations, communities. The US is retreating to a more isolationist policy, America first, as Trump says. In Chicago in 1999, Blair spoke of a moral case for intervention. The most pressing foreign policy problem we face, he said, is to identify the circumstances in which we should get actively involved in other people's conflicts. And the principle of non-interference must be qualified in important aspects. Acts of genocide can never be purely an internal matter, and when oppression produces massive flows of refugees which unsettle neighbouring countries, then they can properly be described as threats to international peace and security. When regimes are based on minority rule, they lose legitimacy, and that is certainly an issue within Jammu and Kashmir. More recently, we have seen the tragic consequences of the drawdown of US troops in northern Syria, leading to a violent vacuum and an abdication of any responsibility for the Kurds, an oppressed group, or the many hardcore ISIS fighters, some estimated 50,000 in total, and their families in prisons or trapped in small towns. The question I was asked before coming to this conference was that of providing a Western perspective, and I don't think that it is a progressive one as we stand here today. The West is withdrawing into domestic agendas. It has a tired moral compass which is failing. How far now are we away from 1999 and Blair's famous speech, where he said that the hand of British and with it European friendship is with you. He said, and we realise that in Britain you have a friend and an ally that will stand with you, that will work with you, that will fashion with you the design of a future built on peace and prosperity for all, which is the only dream that makes humanity worth preserving. What we are witnessing in Kashmir threatens the international peace and security of the region, with acts of state brutality within the Indian-controlled Jammu and Kashmir. 2 nuclear states, 2 nuclear wars, and a stalemate, and with many skirmishes in between. In the last few days, the US President Donald Trump has reiterated his offer to help mediate between India and Pakistan over the disputed territory, whilst meeting Prime Minister Imran Khan. I will make 2 obvious personal points about the US President. The recent US-Israeli-Palestinian offer is a one-sided offer and offers no credible way forward. And secondly, that US interests in Pakistan are considerable, with the threat of religious fanaticism in both northern provinces and Afghanistan. And the US-Afghan drawdown is in part a request to Pakistan to ask Pakistan to step in, step up, and in short, carry more of the burden. Kashmir is a necessary token offer from the United States and risks being seen as that. The reality is that the US President has accepted in the past that Kashmir is an internal matter of India and Pakistan. Just want to turn to US foreign policy priorities. Focusing on China and Iran whilst keeping a lid on other tensions appears to be current US policy thinking, and at a time when Europe is bound up in an internal and populist identity crisis. China dominates United States thinking, or certainly the White House's thinking. And in Pakistan, as in many places, Chinese soft economic power is of major US concern. From Chinese economic investment to the rapid knowledge acquisition China is gaining, the United States worries that China has not and does not have the moral compass and desire to resolve conflict, but in fact tolerates it. US priorities appear to be focused on stability, terrorism, Afghanistan, and Chinese economic influence. As the Washington Post stated, and I repeat last year, the world no longer cares about Kashmir. And it's in the UK too. Before coming out, I was reading the UK press. It's a big article in the Financial Times which reported that Pakistan had bowed to the pressure from China to revive a string of Beijing-backed infrastructure projects, suggesting who the Pakistani government should put in charge of that investment. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is a key part of the Belt and Road Initiative, which Beijing sees as a 21st century Silk Road to connect Asia, Africa and Europe. Beijing says it's frustrated with the slow pace of the initiative, which is supposed to be a shining example of China's economically transformative investments. The question has to be asked, has China ever shown any interest in resolving the Kashmir issue? And that also takes into consideration that part of Kashmir sits within Chinese authority. There is some good news. What does remain from the West, for the time being anyway, is the West's commitment to the world's poorest with large overseas aid programmes. However, whilst ending some of the worst suffering, these programmes alone don't end international crises. And no matter how much aid goes in to the problems, for example, of the Rohingya, those problems run considerably deeper. Just want to turn back to our own voters. Under stress from the rise of Western populism and facing a constant critique of taxpayer generosity with overseas aid programmes, we have to ask the question, how much further patience do Western taxpayers have? And there's a particular issue here which came up when I visited Kashmir. Blaming the West has turned into a reason in the West for many voters to want to turn their back on any moral responsibility overseas. When we stopped off the plane in Islamabad, our delegation was met with the usual full scrum of journalists and camera crews at a press conference. Banks of various TV stations and other journalists were there waiting to discuss the issue of Kashmir. And one question kept coming up. Will Britain accept responsibility for the problems in Kashmir because of the 1947 partition and effectively make some concession or reparation? That visit to Kashmir in 2017 was complemented by previous visits by me as a Member of Parliament to Delhi and to the Lok Sabra on two previous occasions. Once during the time of Prime Minister Modi's first election campaign, where I sought and met Indian Members of Parliament from the disputed region. I was informed by them that everything was fine in Jammu and Kashmir, that reported troubles were over-reported by a hostile media. There was no suggestion of a democratic deficit, but certainly one of a greater India. A greater India rising to the top of the World League of Nations, a nationalistic view without sentiment for democratic or even human rights of Kashmiris. I have to say that such sentiment I find troubling. Nationalism cannot supersede a democratic mandate. That contrasts markedly with my visit to Azad, Kashmir. I was welcomed warmly by all. I travelled freely throughout southern Azad, Kashmir, and met nothing but friendly, peaceful faces. From Muzaffarabad to Mirpur, I saw no sign of conflict, people going about their everyday business, a region, dare I say a country, that has its own elections and its own self-governance. A border where the delegation was handed over from Pakistani security forces to the police services of Azad, Kashmir. To a greater extent, a free people. And I do want to thank the people of Pakistan and particularly Kashmir for that kindness and hospitality. Your Excellency. They're truly generous people who have seen their dreams evaporate over the last 70 years. I wish I could say the same about the people contained within Indian-controlled Jammu and Kashmir, but the Indian government doesn't facilitate visits. A significant statement in itself. In my view, a lack of access speaks loudly of the situation within Indian-controlled Kashmir. The region has been in some form of lockdown for years under the control of the heaviest military presence anywhere in the region, freedoms removed, the line of control a Berlin Wall, and the most recent events, the revocation of Article 370 and its key provision Article 35A, have only escalated these tensions. The decision to effectively annex Jammu and Kashmir into the Indian constitution and remove its distinct identity without any democratic consent is of great concern. It can only be seen as a nationalistic nation building, Greater India like Greater Russia. Except India, however, is viewed strategically different by the West and within the context of China and free trade. Supposedly greater causes than the democracy and the right to self-determination of the people of Kashmir. Who knows how many people have suffered, been brutalised, victims of the deadly pellet guns, or tortured. A curfew is still in force and the internet is still shut down. The line of control deeper, taller, and even more impervious. I know there are some in India, many in fact, who see this as a measure of India's standing. I would argue that the West must reject this argument, and with substance. Gandhi's India should know better than most countries that democratic authority is mandated by the people. To subjugate that mandate risks continued conflict in Jammu and Kashmir. The West should not be seduced by such international manoeuvring, but guided by its values. Those values, however, seem to be slipping away. That the issue of Kashmir, particularly in Indian-controlled Kashmir, can be reduced to a legal, technical issue is to condemn the region to a likely future of strife. A conflict which is in reality a trilateral conflict with the people of Kashmir reduced to the status of non-participant. With the West sat on the sidelines, its moral compass failing, this should not permit what has been the case, a convenient screen for local and regional participants to blame the West. Blaming the West only produces the opposite outcome to that intended, a tired West with a waning interest. As I told the banks of news crews in Islamabad, modern Britain is not to blame for the 1947 partition, just like modern Germany is not responsible for the two world wars. Why should my generation, and I was born in the 1960s, late 1960s, or subsequent generations be responsible for the sins of previous generations, for decisions we may well not have taken ourselves? Why should we be beaten by our parents or our grandparents' stick? Furthermore, subsequent generations rarely hear of the conflict and don't remotely understand the issue. It gets little coverage. How will denigrating young British voters over an issue they don't understand produce a positive outcome? It doesn't. Such a Western perception is now feeding into a weakened West withdrawal from moral causes. That moral direction has been replaced by a policy of issue containment, of prioritising new economic and political threats from China and the dangerous threat of nuclear ambition by Iran and North Korea, of which has more of an impact on Missouri, Michigan, Milan, Middlesbrough than perceptibly Kashmir does. And answering that question in Islamabad, I also made the case that blaming the West negates self-help. It provides a comfort blanket of inaction. I have to finish, Your Excellency, by ending on a more hopeful note. During my meeting with Prime Minister-elect Imran Khan, it was clear to me that a new perspective was coming out of Islamabad, one that was focused on solutions, on making progress. Whether this is maintained or realised is to be seen. From my visit, it is clear that small steps can be made, that great democratic waves can come from the bottom up, and that maybe there is some curious rationale to Western withdrawal. although that's not a view I hold. As I told the banks of media in Islamabad, reporting the facts to the world would be a simple and significant start. Broadcasting in English rather than Urdu would be an obvious point if the West is to listen. But the West can't hear Urdu, can't see and can't understand. It must be able to hear. But at the minute, when I spoke to those broadcast media, how can the West listen or hear? There is a good reason as well why the Indian government turned off telecommunications. They don't want the West to hear. Reporting the facts, and I mean predominantly video news here in English, from the Indian-controlled Kashmir would tell every youngster in Britain, the West, what this conflict actually is about, and in Blair's words, how there is a lack of peace and prosperity for all. I'm not sure that those 30 camera crews and assorted media in Islamabad were ready to receive that message, that this was no longer a Western problem, as they had repeatedly pressed. The West has adopted a clear stance. It is for the two nations to resolve. Having enjoyed the winding mountainous roads of Kashmir and listened to Kashmiris, it is clear that ordinary things can lead to big change. I do believe that both sides should seek to escalate dialogue, negate self-interest, and seek to open up the line of control. Families should not be divided. Families who have not seen each other for generations or who have had to make journeys of several thousand circuitous miles in order to meet long-lost relatives just a few kilometres away is a testament of international failure for what is one of the most basic needs, a family unit. It is with these last words that I finish. A story of a West and a tired generation who, driven by populist movements at home, no longer have the desire to engage in interventionism. Governments and leaders whose moral compass now points away from moral causes to focus on external, economic and immediate military threats. A world that must come to terms with its own failings and have the resolute people and be resolute at having people at heart. We all need to rediscover our belief in partnership and cooperation. Thank you all very much.
Mr. Jones, sir, I'd like to thank you on behalf of my High Commission for having flown all the way from Britain to join us today and share your valuable insights with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very fortunate to have with us today none other than the former Prime Minister of the Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Sardar Attique Ahmad Khan. I would like to invite him now to speak on the topic Current Dynamics in Indian-held Kashmir and Prospects of Peace and Prosperity in the region. Sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Excellency, Major General Retired Mohammed Saad Khattak, High Commissioner of Pakistan, Mr. Graham Jones, ex-member of British Parliament, respected Ms. Alwis, honorable members of diplomatic and intellectual community, distinguished participants. God bless us all with added foresight in present internationally turbulent times. I am heartily grateful to His Excellency Major General Saad Khattak, High Commissioner of Pakistan, for inviting me to address this very important event on Kashmir in a friendly country like Sri Lanka, a part of Pakistan's Kashmir Solidarity Day today. It's a great initiative. General Khattak has been heading an international think tank in Islamabad, very helpful in understanding latest global trends, minds and moods. Organizing a seminar in Sri Lanka points to the rising awareness of regional community on dire dispute over Jammu and Kashmir. The unresolved imbroglio has entered 73rd year with its bloodiest background all along. Our brotherly country Sri Lanka has itself witnessed an unprecedented turmoil of Tamil tigers for a long period of time. But finally, Sri Lankan government succeeded in stemming the tigers' brutal activities off and won the praising laurels of the world. New phase of peace and prosperity dawned in Sri Lanka that is very prideful for us in Pakistan and Kashmir. Highest literacy rate of Sri Lanka has set a glorious example for other countries of the region. Sri Lanka has been previously an active venue of Track 2 Kashmir dialogue, particularly hosting of Pugwash initiatives on dispute resolution. I foresee Track 2 process emerging on the horizon again. The non-settlement of Kashmir is serious legacy and forecast too. The global dimensions of Kashmir conflict have been recognized by the World Peace Body United Nations Organization. We the Kashmiris, as direct affectees of this dispute, are not adding into it already worrisome length of time of non-resolution. Ladies and gentlemen, Kashmir dispute took birth in 1947 in the most sensitive region of South Asia, the disputed land of Jammu and Kashmir, nestled among three nuclear powers of today, Pakistan, China, and India. The conflict is just at a push-button distance with all dangerous consequences for the entire globe. As far as Kashmiris are concerned, they want a peaceful negotiated settlement to this dispute. This wish of theirs should be taken as their firm belief in peace in this region and beyond. Unfortunately, India, despite making local, regional, and international commitments on Kashmir, is not forthcoming to click the peace call. All the past 72 years are a history of arrogance, bigotry, hate, chauvinism, expansionism, and troubles for her neighbors. Indian stubbornness has turned the whole region into a nuclear storehouse. It ignited original arms race. India believes that through its unalterable arrogance, she can exercise lordship over her neighbors in South Asia. She does not believe in truthful virtue that any benign bigness should contribute towards the welfare, peace, and prosperity of others. India's consistent propaganda that Kashmir is a bilateral, regional, internal, or terrorism issue cannot hide the truth of history. Kashmir conflict has direct linkage to the emergence of both Pakistan and Hindustan as two separate independent countries in divided South Asian subcontinent. UN Security Council's January 5, 1949 Kashmir resolution is an extant international record. UN has delivered that roadmap on Kashmir settlement when Hindustan took Kashmir as a dispute to the United Nations. Because of non-resolution of this dispute, South Asia has become today highest nuclearized and militarized region in the world. Only in Kashmir, India has deployed 1 million armed forces to cage 9 million Kashmiris with hearths and herbs today. Ladies and gentlemen, coercion, distortion, malignancy, and hate are the tools that India keeps even while shaking hands with her neighbors. Please look at the caging of 9 million Kashmiris by 1 million military and paramilitary troops besieging whole valley of Kashmir since August 5, 2019. Flouting all promises and pledges Indian leadership has made to the world, standing in the witness box of United Nations Security Council, it militarily bifurcated Kashmir into parts and usurped them what they call union territories. As per UN Charter, no physical change can be made in any disputed region or territory, but she made it in Kashmir. India violated Sacrosanct Charter of United Nations and embroiled international community. And rightly, the UN bounced back under face the wrath of international community when it reminded recently once again that Kashmir is a disputed region. UN Security Council's Kashmir resolutions are very much intact. They are a speaking document. Since August 5, 2019, every diabolic act to make people of Kashmir captive, slamming communications shut down, denying people life-saving drugs, schooling, market approach, even funeral rites had turned Indian-occupied Kashmir into a burning hell. The severities of this situation have been acknowledged by world nations, international media, and international human rights organizations who believe in the worth and value of human life, dignity, and honor. Since the dark day of August 5, the United Nations Security Council has held 2 deliberative sessions on Kashmir conflict, on its emerging implications for the world. Indian Mo of 5th August 2019 on Kashmir is, in fact, a serious aggression that could provoke a regional flare-up. But Pakistan exercised exemplary restraint to de-escalate the warlike situation and tension among nuclear neighbors. What is more worrisome is new form of danger India has built up in the region. The RSS-baptized policies and ill intentions are engulfing all communities within India itself. This dimension of danger poses direct threat to the neighbors. Her amended nationality law is demographic invasion against Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and as away as in Myanmar, Burma. Now a new expansionist propaganda is being silently cultivated. India will absorb small neighbors soon into her economic exclusivity. This is most pious projection. As a response, India's neighbors should get together, form a strategic economic union of theirs. The world reaction towards India after remilitarization and annexation of Kashmir and curtailing civic rights and entities of the Kashmiris is the result of brutal and insane policies of Indian leaders who have gone senseless with the rising RSS extremism and racial hatred. All this poses a threat to regional peace, stability, and prosperity with restive Kashmir in between. But a saner step can transform the ugly situation towards prosperity of all the people in the region if India shuns her stubbornness on disputes with neighbors, principally dispute over Jammu and Kashmir. And sooner or later, history shall unravel Indian traditional arrogance in which she has shelled herself. Ladies and gentlemen, UN Security Council has held 2 extraordinary sessions on Kashmir and South Asian situation, which reflects seriousness of P5 countries. European Union Parliament recorded grave concern, while President Trump has also made repeated offers of mediation on Kashmir conflict. We welcome his renewed interest in the resolution of longest outstanding conflict on the UN agenda and expect his full persuasion. Now a word directly to the Indian public. All problems surrounding India today are the straight offshoots of unresolved state of Kashmir conflict. Indian public has not been informed correctly by their leaders. More oppression of Kashmiris by India will raise the level of resistance among them. It is law of nature. The more you will press the springboard, the more up will be its reaction. Kashmiris are not averse to regional peace. They want return of their usurped rights. Sooner it is done, the better. Kashmiris are not against any country, rather they are struggling for their promised basic right of self-determination. In all circumstances and realities, as a person of faith, I look upon the way forward to a peaceful, amicable resolution of situation. The essence of any process would be inclusion of Kashmiris whose fate is yet to be decided. Before addressing possible steps, I would like to reiterate the historical fact that bilateralism has miserably failed between Pakistan and India. The very creation of these 2 countries was a result of tripartite negotiation. And immediately afterwards, Kashmir conflict was taken to United Nations, setting another example of defeat of bilateralism. Therefore, any step ahead would require a mediation from world powers to de-escalate the ongoing hostile situation. First, two immediate steps in this direction could be: one, there should be an end to the hostile and official threatening statements by the Indian side. Two, end of curfew and resumption of communication in Indian occupied Kashmir. Next step should be to make environment cordial and conducive for any dialogue process to initiate. It would surely require some further steps. One, release of all political prisoners in Indian occupied Kashmir. There are serious growing concerns on the expedited trial of Yasin Malik in Tihar jail. He should be given a fair public trial in any case. Release of all youth that were reportedly taken away by military troops to the jails across India. Three, ceasefire by Indian military in Indian occupied Kashmir, and along with ceasefire line, what we Kashmiris have never accepted as LOC. Four, resumption of intrastate Kashmiri movement and expanding it to all previously 7 agreed routes and simplifying the cumbersome procedures. Five, resumption of intra-Kashmiri dialogue process at all levels between all segments of society. Kashmiri collective wisdom will remove many irritants and misconceptions related to this conflict. Then the further course of action can be decided as how to proceed, but these are minimum steps that must be noted. A serious leadership challenge in this entire process would be to fight back the subversive elements that operate beyond boundaries without any affiliation with faith, religion, or nationality. Every process between Pakistan and India ended up due to a subversive activity. Unfortunately, such elements become part of any conflict zone that is left unaddressed. Any serious process would require closed door, low profile discussion or interaction, miles away from the reach of media. Both sides generally and Indian side especially under current situation have serious political repercussions for any news of political win or defeat against each other. Therefore, this aspect needs to be attended with wisdom and faith. I will go a step further to propose a dialogue with Kashmiri militants organizations as well. It is not a far-reaching thought after the peace process between Afghan Taliban and United States of America. Distinguished participants, I will be failing in my moral duty if I do not repeat my deep gratitude to Major General Saad Khattak for organizing this event in Sri Lanka as part of humanitarian solidarity with the people of Jammu and Kashmir. They are struggling for their birthright to self-determine their political fate and affiliation, as well as for regional peace and stability. I wish you all continued success in your pursuits of life, peace, honor, and dignity. Thanks. Kashmir banega Pakistan, Pakistan Zindabad, long live Pakistan, Sri Lanka, trusted friendship.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to have on our panel today a young and dynamic female speaker, Ms. Medha D. Alwis. Medha practices as a counsel in the primary to the appellate courts with experience in handling inquiries, leading evidence, cross-examination, submissions, and arguments in panels, tribunals, and courts. Having been a presenter at the South Asia Regional Civil Affairs Subject Matter Expert Exchange, Medha has conducted lectures and trainings to the military on international humanitarian law and international disaster management law. Further trainings have been conducted on legal counseling for officers, legal training, military and civil legal issues to all officers and other ranks. I would now like to invite Ms. D. Alwis to share her thoughts on South Asian issues and the Sri Lankan perspective. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Aisha. I thank the Pakistani High Commission for this gracious invitation. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends. Excuse my throat. There are a lot of my students here who know that I have a very beautiful voice, but I have been traveling since midnight yesterday and have had a terrible accident last night, which nobody knows about. But certainly, you hear me clear and well, do you not? Yes, wonderful. I'm seeking the assistance of the technical staff for my presentation, as we do not have the automatic gadget. Yes. In my presentation, I would like to focus on peace and stability as an imperative to prosperity in South Asia. I would like to raise the question whether peace and stability, whether it's an imperative to the prosperity of South Asia. If so, what have we as a region, what have we as the South Asian region done so far in the past so many decades? Sri Lanka celebrated her independence yesterday, and what as a collective region South Asia has done to achieve peace and stability and also consensus among the region. To start with, yes, onward South Asia. This is my focus because we will be talking so much. My very erudite two other panelists talked about a lot of the conflicts and the situations and the past and the present situation in South Asia. My focus would be as to make a consensus, as to make a discussion in our panel discussion as to how we can move onward as a region and what we could do about it, what are the mistakes we have done so far as a region, and what are we as separate countries of the region and as individuals can do to rectify those mistakes and move onward. In that context, I would like to speak on a few points. That is about being strong as a nation. We need to now come forward out of the mentality of depending on the West. We have for so long depended on the fact that the West has to be knowledgeable about our issues, the West has to act, react, and to be responsive about this. Yes, it is wonderful if the West does so. It is wonderful if any other region, not only the West, it's wonderful if the ASEAN or the EU or any other region does so. But having waited for so many years, when there is not a certain response or there isn't a reliable, or if there isn't a response that we are happy about, it's high time that we as South Asia take up the responsibility and move forward in finding solutions to our own problems. And how do we do that as a region? Kashmir certainly is one of the major issues that is in the region, but it's not only Kashmir. There are so many other smaller, quote-unquote smaller problems. There isn't anything called small, there's anything called big. If it is an issue, it is an issue. But without completely embarking on the issues we have, how are we looking forward independently of the West, independently of the other regions as South Asia to go towards in handling all our issues, including Kashmir? I consider the smaller brothers in the region, such as Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Afghanistan, Maldives, they are all being affected because our two big brothers are fighting. In a house where there are small sisters and brothers and the two big brothers are fighting, the entire region can be in a chaos. But the smaller states, again, I quote unquote, there's nothing called small. All states having a vote in the United Nations, all states having equal priority and equal place in the map of the world. What have we done to resolve these conflicts that are there among our big brothers, and particularly about the Kashmir issue? What has the other countries in the region done? I feel that the region as a collective has not been responsible enough in settling our own issues. One would be a certain slave mentality, including myself, about counting on our education from the West. Most of the erudite people in the region, well, talking about Sri Lanka, including myself, hail from the West. Some of us have spent more time, very fondly we discussed about our beautiful time that we spent in England, have spent sometimes more of our time, more of our life in the West. There's nothing wrong in gaining an education from somewhere else and bringing the fruits back home. But as South Asia, are we concentrating on? Are we really concentrating on? We are of course establishing very, very strong educational institutes, but are we coming out of that mentality that to be self-sufficient in education in South Asia? How many of us would look forward to go to one or the other, our brothers and sisters in South Asia for education rather than going out of the region? Also about the national language issue that one of my panelists very, very, very excellently pointed out, that unless it is broadcasted, being a journalist, broadcasted in English? How would the West get to know about it? But one of the impediments that we have in the region is that we do not have a common language. One would be Urdu, one would be Hindi, one would be Sinhalese, then we have a problem about Sinhalese and Tamil language, then Nepalese, Bhutanese. As much as we respect our diversity, what have we done as a region to take our mother languages, all these languages and more that I mentioned, to the map of the world, to make them celebrators' languages in the world? What have we done as a nation? And here in this gathering, what have we done as individuals? I'm asking these questions because rather than just giving out an idea, I would like it to be opened up in the discussion and in the panel discussions on these questions. And also about the travel mentality, about peace and security, about peace and stability. As a journalist who has been interested in conflict resolution and also peace studies, how much are we looking at, how much are we writing about, how much are we talking about, other than in forums exclusive like this, about reconciliation issues in Sri Lanka? I would like to talk about my own, I'll be putting out some of the few news items that I myself, with my byline, have done on the north and east, and also in the entire of Sri Lanka, about, on the subject of post-conflict and reconciliation. So specializing as a post-conflict and reconciliation writer, rather experimenting on that field. Here we get things like Buddhist and Hindu priests join hands in Jaffna to resolve issues, and missing persons leader being called for inquiry. So just to brief that, the Missing Persons Association in Vaunia, which has passed the 1078th day last Sunday. There are so many aspects to this that as to, I do not discount for any moment the pain of a family member of a missing person. But as a nation, we need to move forward. People there had been calamities, there had been tragedies, always that is a case of conflict, but do we always embark on the tragedies of the conflict, or do we move forward? The state policy at the moment is that certificates would be issued and we move forward, because at the moment we need to concentrate on reconciliation and development, not only to focus on some of the pain. Pain is there, I'm not saying it's not there. I personally will not be able to speak about it because during the war I was either in Colombo or most of the time I was not in the island. So I do empathize with the pain a person feels, but can we just go on embarking on that pain alone, or should we not, like the current Sri Lankan state says, move on and move on towards development? And these are the protests that have been, which I just told about. And here is one of the suspects who had been jailed for 37 years, who had been jailed in as a teenager. I'm just taking out issues, and also so much credit to our armed forces taking extensive effort of reconciliation in the north and the east and throughout Sri Lanka. Having visited the north and the east many a times, I actually live in the east at the moment, and only my holidays are in Colombo at the moment. So also all these are not just reported by me, they are researched, and each and every person who is involved in these news items have been spoken to, interviewed, and gone into the lives and the issues that they have been speaking about. So if you ask me in the panel discussion, I can give you elaborate instances. And about the fishermen issue, Sri Lanka Navy is doing an amazing job about IUU fishing and about reconciling into a lot of the problems that we have with regard to fishing. And this is the current corona crisis. So in summary about the conflict situation or the post-conflict situation in Sri Lanka, what I would have to say is that there is an absolute so much effort and very meritorious effort taken by the armed forces and the government of Sri Lanka. Yet, I'm emphasizing this point because once a conflict situation has happened, it is very difficult to completely come to terms of it, though the conflict has been officially over. One such example is missing persons that we discussed about, and then there could be things like the national anthem, which had been one of the most debated issues in journalism and also in the country. There are two schools of thought in this, that if the national anthem is sung in different languages of the different ethnicities, everybody will have a belonging. Yes, that's true. But second position is two schools of thought. I'm not identifying with any particular school of thought. I'm just objectively discussing that. Second school of thought is if it's sung in one language, everybody will feel united. So that also is a very strong position. So it's all about how you perceive it and how we want to move towards it. Military presence. Military presence is one of the, with all due respect, my colleague journalists in the North and the East raised this issue to me many times, all the time I'm there. Military presence, what I have to say is, well, we have had a conflict for 30 years, and the roots of that had been there for even more. So we are talking about a conflict situation that has been there for over 3 decades. And it has finished, it's only 10 years that it has finished. Can we, just because the conflict finished, can we withdraw military presence from that area? We cannot. Because if we need to ascertain that peace and security continues in the region, we need to have military presence. And military presence is not so enormous. I have extensively spent my time in Jaffna, Mulatiw, Vaunia, and a lot in the east. Military is there for their normal activities, for administrative, logistics, all those activities. Military has to be there in any part of the island. For that, and also to ascertain peace and stability, there is some necessary, mandatory requirement. For that, the military is there. And also about military land ownership. Talking about land ownership by the military, one does not talk about how much percentage is held. It's a very little percentage. I have all the statistics with MOD covering, which I would not want to talk about here, but it's a very small percentage that is held by the military. And also I would like to raise the question as to the released land, how much is occupied, how much is used? There's no point of going on releasing land unless that is being used. Now we would move on to global challenges. That us as a country or a region cannot be independent unless we are sensitive to the global challenges that we would face being a part of the globe. And one of the problems that we would have in the region is that we do not respect the position that we are one member of the United Nations and one member of the entire globe. As global challengers, we have a global power rivalry, and that all countries wanting to be emerging powers and superpowers. It is very easy to say that being a small state, to point my finger at a bigger state, a more powerful state, and say that they want to be as superpowers. But we need to understand why a bigger, powerful state wants to be a superpower. Because that there isn't a consensus, there isn't an agreement, and there isn't support that is coming up as a region from the smaller power as well, throughout the globe. It is not only in the South Asian region. So the moment we have pointed our finger to a bigger brother, that they are trying to be a superpower, 4 fingers are at us, that we do not take responsibility in amalgamating, cooperating, and collaborating with all those world leaders and with the South Asian region in particular. We have crises like global warming and terrorism. It has taken teenagers like Greta to come forward and make a stand. I personally feel that as grown-ups, we haven't done our duty. We have not taken our step forward and taken a stand about crises in the world. And as a South Asian region, what have we done about global warming or about climate change? Then about the economic disparity that exists among the countries within South Asian region. Yes, so many scholarships are shared, so much cooperation is happening financially, but is that sufficient is a question that I would like to leave to the audience. And when you talk about globalization, it has come to a level that integration is important, that integration and collaboration is mandatory, and as a state that we need to, as a region, we need to always check ourselves as to how much collaboration we have done and how much collaboration we are willing to do. Coming back to being the focus of the seminar on South Asia, what is the way forward? So we have over 2 billion population, one of the most populous regions of the world. And we have our own problems when it comes to education, development, military deployment, welfare, etc. And it is high time that the SAARC sits together, see eye to eye, and join hands and discuss about these problems. And also not just discuss about problems, but make each other's in this region as South Asia be accountable for the mistakes we have done and for moving forward. What have we as a region done for the crisis in Afghanistan, the internal strife in Afghanistan? What have we done about Kashmir? Are we doing anything constructive about it to help the big brothers in the region? Or even the smaller brothers? What about the internal conflicts that are happening in Nepal and Bhutan? What have we as a region done about it? And also, South Asia to be as strong as a region is high time that I would urge this, and I can't repeat or emphasize this anymore, that our two big brothers, I'm happy that one brother is present here, but the other brother is not even present, but the two big brothers have to. It's high time that they come into unity. Otherwise, the little sister, the little brother at home suffers. We have so much on a lighter note. We have so much in common. We have so much common in culture, common in religion. We have cricket. Britain, England has given us a legacy, but it's we who carry the legacy. It is my dream that the passion we have for cricket in South Asia, that we carry it forward, so that at least we use that on a lighter note. We use that our passion for sport to see the problems we face and to share each other's problems and to come to an agreement among the nations in South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Medha. To conclude the panel discussion, ladies and gentlemen, may I now invite the High Commissioner of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Major General Retired Mohammad Saad Khattak, to share his thoughts on the topic. Sir, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, thank you very much. Members of the panel have presented excellent exposés enlightening us on the current environment in the regions, focusing on Kashmir. But before I say something related to the topic, let me show you 2-3 slides that will give you an insight of what South Asia is. Can you show the first slide? We have 1.8 billion people living in this part of the world. Out of 4 billion on this planet, we are 1.4, almost a quarter of the world's population lives in South Asia. Next slide, please. I hope if you can see, out of this 1.8 billion people living in South Asia, 16.1% of them are living on $2 a day. That's below the poverty line. This is the situation in South Asia. And if you go to the countries, you see Afghanistan leading, and then other countries, including India, which is I think around 21% of its people are living below the poverty line. This is the state of affairs. Now all these people, especially these 16.1 people, deserve to live an honorable living, just like anywhere else in the world. But they are not because of reasons. What are those reasons? As Alwis was referring to, that there is a fight between two brothers. It's not actually a fight between two brothers. It's in fact the elder brother twisting the arms of the rest of its brothers in the South Asian area. And when I say that, it does not allow any country in the region, including my host country, my friendly country, to exploit its full potential Because I always say that why Sri Lanka cannot become Singapore? When it is having 97% of literacy rate, when it has all the facilities, all the assets, why can't it become? This is the reason that why can't it become. And you are not the one. Why should the people of Afghanistan hate its brethren in Pakistan? After having done for them so much, is it only because of the doings of the people of Afghanistan? No, it's not because of the people of Afghanistan. It is because of the people, or because of the people, or because of the policies of certain other, our friends, quote unquote, that they hate their brethren, their neighbors. So, people say that you don't develop because there is no infrastructural development. What is the difficulty of infrastructural development between Pakistan and Afghanistan, that they are not trading to the potential of the two countries? What is the difficulty of infrastructure between Pakistan and Sri Lanka? We have excellent sea lines of communication, that the two cannot exploit its full potential in terms of trade between the two of us. And why can't we, Pakistan and India? What is the infrastructural difficulty between these two countries? But of course there are difficulties. There is a difficulty. And nothing can move towards normalcy and prosperity unless that major issues, that unfinished agenda is settled. And that is what has been the underlying theme of this seminar for which we have got collected here. Now, a once called biggest democracy of the world. Please put your hands on the heart, on your hearts, and ask yourself, does that really stand for the values of democracy as you see and as you hear and as you watch today, day in and day out? What's happening in that country to its minorities? Not only the Muslim minorities, to other minorities. When we talk of the major powers, great powers, superpowers, when they very jealously guard their superpower status, great power status, it comes with responsibilities, it comes with morality, it comes with conscience. Where has that conscience gone? Where has that morality gone to address that self-created, unfinished agenda? How many more bodies of the Kashmiris would be required to move the conscience and morality of those who wish to continue and lead the world and now see challenges to its leadership? Will the West and the United States only let the people of Kashmir die because China is rising? Will China stop rising if the massacre of the Kashmiris continue? It will not stop rising. That's written on the wall. So therefore, the sacrifices of the people of Kashmir, their rights for their self-determination, should not be tied to the rise of a nation that has struggled for that position and that status. Therefore, I would like to give this message to the international community, those with conscience, those with morality. If this was, as Mr. Trump says, just Graham Johns has just referred to it, that he says that it is between India and Pakistan. If it was between India and Pakistan, why was it being discussed just a few weeks back in the United Nations Security Council? We, the people of Pakistan and the people in the occupied Jammu and Kashmir have struggled for 70 years to keep this issue alive, and we will continue to keep this issue alive for another 70 to 100 and 1,000 years until and unless the rights of their self-determination as per the United Nations Security Council resolution is realized for the people of Kashmir. The struggle will continue. Whatever the cost and whatever the blood that it takes, it will continue. So that sort of a statement coming out from statesmen who rule and countries who rule the world perhaps is very small statement. The international community will have to own up its responsibility. The leadership of the world will have to own up its responsibility to address the issue of the Jammu and Kashmir and allow the people of this region to live amongst themselves with happiness and prosperity. Let me also, Mr. Graham Jones, I am quoting another Mr. Graham. I wonder if he was related to you in one way or the other, because I believe all the Grahams are good people, because people with conscience and good morals, because another Graham I am quoting, and please read this. This is what he said in 1967 when he was the UN representative on Kashmir. Please read. The possible drift of great powers down the road towards universal annihilation may, by example, be turned even a little bit to little Kashmir towards the peaceful struggle of the people of the region, up the rugged road towards responsible self-determination of people, effective demilitarization, peaceful coexistence, and cooperation of all nations for peace on earth and goodwill towards men. Next. And in the same report he says, a peaceful democratic settlement of Kashmir dispute will help to cool off one of the hot spot on the earth. It will be one building block in the patient construction of law and peace in the world, and strengthen the United Nations as needed by all people in all lands, and effective UN strengthened to meet the needs of all people in the nuclear age is the hope of the little nations and the developing nations for political and economic self-determination, reciprocal trade, cultural interchange, and spiritual autonomy in this world of vast danger and hope. Now, this is what a man with conscience said in 1967. And let me also say that the international community also owes a responsibility to keep this boiling pot, this hot boiling pot, cool, because of the obvious reason that there's every day on the line of control a provocative firing by the Indian forces, mainly targeting the civilian population of Azad Kashmir. And this, as everybody says, can escalate sometime to a situation that will not remain restricted to the people of the subcontinent alone, but may engulf the entire region and the entire humanity. So on that score, I think the international community needs to own up its responsibility and raise its voice, compel the Indian government to come to the table and ultimately fulfill its obligation that it made almost 70 years before to the United Nations Security Council. In the end, I would like to thank all the speakers who have come all the way from their respective countries and making this possible that we hold this seminar. I would also like to thank all the audience, all the respected domestic audience, and the excellencies who are here. I thank you all for sharing our feelings on the this dilemma that the South Asia is facing, and thank you very much, all of you. Very kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for sharing your very heartfelt words with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, the language of music, as you all know, is universal. We would now play a song in order for all of us to empathize with the pain and misery of the people of the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir.
ऐ काबिज़ कर आज़ाद मुझे, जिस खातिर है मैंने नस्लें कुर्बान की, जिस खातिर है मैंने नस्लें कुर्बान की। कितने वानी तू मारेगा, मेरे हर बेटे ने खाई कसम ईमान की, मेरे हर बेटे ने खाई कसम ईमान की। कश्मीर हूँ मैं शहरक पाकिस्तान की। कश्मीर हूँ मैं शहरक पाकिस्तान की। कितना लहू है बहना मेरा, कितना और बहाओगे, कितनी माँओं के आंसू देखे, कितनी और रुलाओगे। हर सू मेरे आग लगी है, कितना और जलाओगे, कितना और जलाओगे। जालूटी वादी सारी, कर फिक्र जरा अपने भी तू अंजाम की। कितने वानी तू मारेगा, मेरे हर बेटे ने खाई कसम ईमान की, मेरे हर बेटे ने खाई कसम ईमान की। कश्मीर हूँ मैं शहरक पाकिस्तान की। ओ कश्मीर हूँ मैं शहरक पाकिस्तान की। सच अपना ये दुनिया से तुम कब तक और छुपाओगे। कितने जख्म लगे हैं पहले, कितने और लगाओगे। दर्द है देखे मासूमों के, और सितम क्या ढाओगे, और सितम क्या ढाओगे। मंजिल मेरी आजादी है, परवाह नहीं चाहे जाती है जान भी। कितने वानी तू मारेगा, मेरे हर बेटे ने खाई कसम ईमान की, मेरे हर बेटे ने खाई कसम ईमान की। कश्मीर हूँ मैं शहरक पाकिस्तान की। कश्मीर हूँ मैं शहरक पाकिस्तान की।
I think that is very heartbreaking for any conscientious human being. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely hope and pray that our brethren and sisters in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir are granted their right for self-determination very soon, inshallah. I would now like to request the High Commissioner of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Major General Retired Mohammad Saad Khattak, to please present mementos on behalf of the Pakistan High Commission to all our panel members. Sir. I would first like to request Mr. Graham Jones to please receive his memento.
No questions?
Thank you, sir. May I now request Sardar Attique Ahmed Khan to please receive his memento? Thank you, sir. May I now request Ms. Medha D. Alwis to receive her memento? Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Excellency. I would now like to open the floor for question and answer session. Whoever desires to ask a question from any of our panelists is most welcome.
I'd like to take you to right honorable former MP Ben Jones when he says that his generation should not feel responsible for resolving issues that were before their time. And I news that he should parallel that sense of responsibility or lack thereof with Germany's taking responsibility for Hitler's actions. Mr. Jones, if that were true, there would not be anti-Semitism laws so faithfully followed in Germany today, and Hitler's period would not be considered a national shame. While you may not be responsible for, and also very little, he also quote from President Obama, whom he so eloquently quoted, is that when the drawdown for US troops was announced from Afghanistan, he said, America cannot solve every problem in the world. And both to President Obama and to yourself, let me submit that you should at least consider resolving problems that you create. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jones, sir.
Well, in response, I think the parallel is that I was trying to paint a position of how a young person in the United Kingdom would perceive things, and I think that I'm passionate about the Kashmiri issue, and I can see that it is counterproductive. I can see that the argument, and it's one that, and the reason I raised it was relentless, that somehow the United Kingdom, Britain, is responsible because of 1947. And I understand that. I get all of that. I wasn't negating history. But for the cause that is Kashmir, to young people, it does not resonate. They are being held accountable for things that have gone on in past generations which they don't understand, and I'm pretty certain they wouldn't have made the decision that their forebears made. And not only that, there is a class issue here as well, which I didn't raise, which was the old Etonian establishment that drew these lines on maps in Libya, in Syria, in Kashmir, etc. It wasn't the working classes and the young working classes that would ever have drawn these lines. So I think that they somehow feel that if they're to pay the price of others' sins, that's rather unfair. I don't think, my point being, and the message that I'm trying to convey is, it's not helpful to the cause of Kashmir is to get people who should be on your side on the other side, who become disengaged because somehow it's their problem and it's a problem that they don't really feel ownership of. That was the point that I was making, not necessarily the issue with what went on, that generations move on and they think differently. And if we are to pursue the cause of Kashmir, we must be mindful that we take these people with us and don't push against them.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shiraz Enos. I have a very 2-3 points to be answered by the our member of parliament. First question I will ask that just said that West is much more keen and interested to resolve this issue. Has it been the same way which the West thinks of resolving the Palestinian issue? Geographically, see, it's a very small place, and West can't do anything about that more than now 50 years, nearly 50 years. And do you think that geographically much bigger in size, culture differences, can they resolve the Kashmir issue? Number one. One more question. And we have told about the integrity and cultural connections. With due respect to British Empire, former East India Company, when they left the region, they had put us in chaos. Very sadly, I'm saying, it's like having a mouthful of rice with people eat with hand. Even if one finger is cut, you can't have a full mouthful. In Urdu, if we say, एक निवाला अगर आपको चाहिए तो आप खाने में 5 उंगलियां यूज करनी पड़ती हैं. अगर एक उंगली भी कट जाए तो एक पूरा निवाला आपके पास नहीं आएगा. So is that kind of a thing, are we going to look forward, and what is the West going to do about it in the coming 5 to 10 years? Thank you.
Well, I think that I presume that the West, I think that what I tried to speak of was not particularly my view, but how I see the West living there and their response and their views. I have my own views. I'm passionate about Kashmir, but what I was trying to present was a more broader view that exists. And again, the Palestinian issue is another British issue if you want to go back in time from the mandate that we have had in the region and the lines on the maps that we drew. Just particularly about the Israel-Palestinian issue, again, I'm passionate about the Palestinian cause. I think it's a great injustice, but I think it is tremendously difficult to resolve. And again, you know, there are questions about Israeli authority and the way that they conduct themselves and how this only prolongs that particular struggle. And they are grave injustices, as they are in Kashmir. So returning to the issue of Kashmir, and I said, you know, the situation now is, and I think you highlighted it, that the West doesn't seem to be as interested as it should be. And the point I made is we need to rediscover our moral compass. The high point of that moral compass for me was Blair in Chicago in 1999 when he talked about an interdependence, cooperation, and that we must seek to gain peace and security across the world, for there is no other greater cause than to elevate humanity. And we must do that through cooperation and collectively. And that was a high point for the West. And I certainly at that moment was excited because I thought that this was the world that we all want to see working together. And the point I made is that the West, not particularly my view, I agree with Blair that we should return to that, but that we have fallen from that crest. And we have fallen to such a low level now that we are looking inward more than we are looking outward. But do we have a responsibility? Well, I think Blair was right. We all have a responsibility. And I think that, if I'm being brutally honest from my visit to Kashmir, but just the journalists, not the people, to simply blame Britain runs the risk of it being a comfort blanket of inaction, as I said in my speech, that Blair was right, that we all have a duty to resolve this together, cooperatively, including the West, but led by those in the region and led by all participants, not by some participants. However, that's not where we are. Can we resolve it? And the big question that you finished with, my own personal view is, I think it can be. I am an optimist. However, I think that where we are now, particularly with India, well, I would say almost exclusively with the position that the Indian government takes itself and its international relationships with the West, that the best way to resolve this is for the people of Kashmir to resolve this. And I know that human rights must be restored, and I didn't mention that because I touched on it, but because I was asked to give a Western perspective. But if I was giving a Kashmiri perspective, I would have started off from the human rights abuses, which are a disgrace and need to stop. But more broadly, and for the people of Azad Kashmir and for Kashmiris, this has to be a movement in which there are lots of small gains, and as a democratic movement, it gains legitimacy, and that legitimacy becomes unstoppable, even for Greater India.
Do we have any other question? Yes, sir. Mr. Zaki. Can we have the mic at the back, please? At the back.
Jabba, Mr. Graham Jones. Now you see, this has been spoken over and over again. This has been spoken over and over again. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
close it to your mouth.
This has been spoken over and over again, and solutions have been put on the table. How do you see, I mean, we are talking of UN resolutions, and we are talking of UN resolutions, we are talking of various solutions. India now says, no, Kashmir is part of India. The UN is passing resolutions. The West is saying various things. Do you see a resolution of this in the near future to the satisfaction of all sides?
Mr. Jones.
Well, I think that I touched on this again with the loss of moral compass by the West, that the very institution, the international institution, the United Nations now, is coming into question, whether it, can enforce the mandates and the resolutions that it passes, or whether it is a moribund body that is unable to act. And certainly in this particular issue, we have an India who turns this into some technocratic, legal, technical argument about this conference, that meeting, this resolution. For instance, they'll fall back on Simla all the time, and the UN does not have the capacity to be the arbiter or have the capacity to resolve that issue, in my view. It just sits back and says what many in the West say: this is an issue that must be resolved by two great nations, and we are watching. And that is the extent. So I think it's a terrible situation that we're in, and India's role in all of this, quite frankly, is appalling. As an outsider and a look in, the fact that people's democratic wishes are being ignored. There is a democratic deficit. There is no democratic mandate. What is happening is terrible. And a United Nations that can sit round, drink cups of tea, pass resolutions, but as you well know, for the last 70 years, how much action has there been? We have the resolution from 49. What's been done about it? Where is the plebiscite? Where is the action? Where has the international community been for 70 years? It passed a resolution at the United Nations. Why 70 years on are we still debating it?
Thank you. Yes, sir. Can we have the mic here? Sir, he's bringing the mic. Thank you.
So my question is to His Excellency the High Commission of Pakistan. My name is Chamila Monasinghe. By designation, I'm a colonel from Sri Lanka Army. Sir, that during our childhood, even that we have been listening to this Jammu and Kashmir issue. And after joining the army, that although we don't like that, we are compelled to study on this issue, that since that we have to, during our examinations, that we have to answer for certain questions. So what we have seen that it's even if I mention it give the description about this issue in layman language, it's like a wound of the street vendor, like never-ending conflict. So time to time it escalates, and the fragile peace enjoying by two parties, two neighbors, and because of the tension develop in the region. The people of the Saad, the 8 countries also not in a peaceful mind to enjoy the real peace, because we don't know that when it's going to be escalate next time, because it has been continuous process. There had been so much of dialogues and the conferences held to find a permanent solution for this issue. Rather than fingering to one party, so if you put both the 2 major parties together, so what are the core issues that you all have identified where this problem cannot be sorted out? That's my question, sir.
Well, if I have correctly understood your question, you mean to say that why the 2 countries cannot sit together and talk about this core issue? Is this what you are referring to?
Absolutely.
I think from Pakistan's perspective, the invitation to resume dialogue, we had been, in the early 80s, we started off with a composite dialogue between the 2 countries. And then on various pretexts, one pretext or the other, the Indian government have been postponing, cancelling that dialogue, and ultimately they have terminated that dialogue altogether. So you can only solve a problem if you wish to talk about it. Now, our Prime Minister, even the current Prime Minister, rather successive Prime Ministers have always said that if India takes 1 step, we will take 2 steps to sit down and talk about this issue. But when you have a country and leadership which always take refuge in anything that happens on this earth and link it to Pakistan and say that this is being done or orchestrated in Pakistan, and therefore we will not talk to Pakistan. So what can you do about when, if for ever since the Simla Agreement of 1972, this was supposed to be talked about between the 2 countries, but that bilateralism has not worked on one pretext or the other, and most of the time it had not been because of the Pakistan's making. Because if something happens anywhere, like they have become masters of false flag operations, and I always even tell my friends here that beware of, they have a great qualification in this type of sort of operations. So the answer is that Pakistan has been willing, Pakistan is willing, and Pakistan will be willing to talk as long as the talk is focused on the core issue between the 2 countries, as is the issue of the Jammu and Kashmir. That if they are sidelining the issue of the Jammu and Kashmir and they want to do trade with Afghanistan through Pakistan, that's not going to happen. So we have to address the issue of the Jammu and Kashmir. That is the core issue between the 2 of us, for which we are prepared to talk. If they are prepared to talk, I think our country will start the dialogue with them even tomorrow.
Thank you, Excellency. Any other question? Mr. Zaki has another question.
Excellency, some time back when General Musharraf was the president, I interviewed him in his Islamabad office, and he said that Pakistan would, whatever the verdict in a plebiscite, he would accept it. But now, I think that we have gone beyond that, because now India now says, well, this Kashmir is now part of India. So invariably all these resolutions and agreements have, well, on paper they have become ineffective. So how does Pakistan hope to take this forward? Because India now says, no, this is not negotiable. Kashmir is now part of India, and that has been enshrined in the constitution.
That is their stance. That's not Pakistan's stance, and that is not the international community's stance. That is not the United Nations stance. It is very clearly mentioned in the United Nations Security Council resolutions that it is an issue on the agenda of the United Nations. It is an unresolved issue. It is an unfinished agenda. Merely saying by India that it is a part of their country, they have been saying it since 1947 or since they have annexed Kashmir forcibly. So the point is that whatever they say is not important. What is on the agenda of the United Nations Security Council, I think that is important. Maybe that Sardar Sahab wish to contribute towards this.
That is the correct position which High Commissioner has explained, and we need to learn the lesson from history that no forceful occupation would continue for a longer time. There was a time when we had Soviet Union. Now it's not, there is no more Soviet Union. So we have dozens of Muslim states there, independent states. So as long as it remains on the United Nations Security Council's agenda, it is an international issue recognized by the world bodies. And just in 6 months after 65, this is for the first time after a very long time, that in 6 months' time, International UN Security Council has held 2 deliberative sessions on Kashmir. If it was internal issue, if it was integral part of India, it was a domestic issue, it was local issue, it would not have been taken up by the international community. And this is 7th time that President United States wants to come in to mediate. So whether it is simple agreement, whether it is bilateral talks, but ultimately sooner or later we have to resume the dialogue. A resumption of dialogue and a negotiated political settlement is the only answer. Otherwise, they're going to be a complete disaster.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any other question?
Could I just
Mr.
say
Jones.
something? Could I just say something about this is a moral and democratic issue, and when it's turned into a legal, technical issue, I think that is a smokescreen in some ways. There is peace on the streets of Azad, Kashmir. There may be demands or there may be a democratic debate, but there is peace. In Indian-controlled Jammu and Kashmir, there are riots on the streets, there are people suffering. The Indian government, by its own declaration, has had to send 1 million troops in. The Indian government has to accept that there is a democratic issue here. It has to accept that there is a moral issue. It is no one else's obligation other than the Indian government to resolve that deficit in Jammu and Kashmir as the controlling authority, not anybody else's. And I say that clearly, that this is, and when we talk about it being a legal or bureaucratic or United Nations issue, I worry that we miss the point that these people are suffering and there is a lack of responsibility from the Indian government in serving the people, as Blair said, to make people prosperous and better off. There is a lack of accountability from the Lok Sabha to these, or from the Prime Minister, to serve the people of whom he has authority over at this moment in time. And that is the issue that's sat on the table. That is not anybody else's issue. 1 million Indian troops is an issue for India. And I just want to say one more point, going back. And I made this during my speech. The video was excellent, but I didn't understand what was said. Once again, there's been a presentation of Kashmir in a foreign language, and as a Westerner, I didn't hear anything. I might have seen something, but it was very hard with all those fast-moving images to actually see and hear and understand fully. And this was the point that I made. If it's one thing to blame the West, but when you're not even communicating with the West, it's a bit of a shallow argument. More effort has to be done for this to be, as Blair said, an international effort to resolve this crisis. And an international effort means reaching out cooperatively and working with people. And the first thing that we ought to do is speak to people so that they understand this issue better. And, the video was great. I'm not knocking the video. I hope they come back with an English language version because it was great and we can all share it. But it was missing that international dimension.
Thank you. Do we have any other question? So, we don't have any more questions. I would like to once again thank all our participants for joining us today and all our panelists for sharing their valuable views and insights with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we would now have a group photo with our panelists, our High Commissioner, and the staff members, while I request all the participants to please join us for a cup of tea in the lobby. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.